Welcome, everybody, to our continuing series where we talk to professors, writers, reporters, columnists, activists, people on the left, people on the right. We don't care. We just want to have intelligent conversations and provide it directly to you, the public, because we don't think the mainstream media is doing that. With us today is Jeffrey Stonecash. He's a distinguished professor Emeritus of Political Science at the Syracuse University Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. His area of expertise is media and public opinion, in addition to other things. Distinguished Professor Emeritus Political Science Department at Syracuse University. His specialties are political parties, realignment of the electoral bases, the impact of changing alignments on the nature of policy debates. We're going to get into all of that. Some of the publications he's worked on have been Party Pursuits and Presidential House Election, Connections 1900 to 2008, Counter Realignment, Political Change in the Northeast, The Dynamics of American Political Parties with Mark Brewer out of Cambridge University Press, Split, Class and Cultural Divides in American Politics, that's very relevant, Political Parties Matter, Realigning and the Return of Partisan Voting, very relevant, and Class and Party in American Politics. This is the book where I found out about him. It's called Political Polarization in American Politics, edited by Daniel Hopkins. We've covered a little bit about Daniel Hopkins before. And this was the chapter. Why are we polarized? Two key factors behind our polarized politics. Professor Jeffrey Stonecash. Professor, did I get anything wrong with your name, the title, background? Is there areas of expertise we should have covered? Did I?
No, I'm glad you didn't talk to the FBI or CIA.
Not yet. Not yet. Next show, we're going to get into that. What was this chapter about political polarization? The two factors behind our polarized politics. And why did you write it? This book is, I think, 1 or 2 years old. I could be wrong. Why did you write it?
That now?
Okay. It's a couple years old.
Yeah.
Why did you write this? Let's travel back in time a few years. If I asked you why you're writing it now, I think people would get it. But a couple years ago, what were you seeing at the time that you were approached to write this chapter for this book? And why did you think in the past that talking about political polarization was a good idea? What were you seeing at that time? Why did you think this was a worthy topic? Why did you spend time writing this chapter?
Well, now let me preface the comments. I've progressed considerably beyond that. I'm just done with a book about which hasn't gone out yet, about what's happened to the Republican Party in the last 50, 60 years and how they have transformed. And it's just a continuation of what was in that article. I think what's really happened over a long period of time, and it really is a remarkable long period of time, is that the parties have really swapped the electoral bases they had about 60 years ago. And what was the old Democratic Party has now become the new Republican Party. And that the party moved to the South and the West, and they lost their base. The Republican Party lost their base in the Northeast. And what's happened is the issues that I watched develop in the 80s and 90s, in which Reagan just really started them off, have come to full fruition right now. I mean, we're really watching the consequence of that. And that the parties now have electoral bases which are much more unified and really detest each other, really believe that each other is undermining America. I mean, it's pretty serious stuff. It's not a battle over regulatory policy, though there is that. It's not just a battle over taxes. It's really a battle over each side now sees the other as just really detrimental to America. It's been a long time coming. And I think we're at a point right now where it's almost impossible to have a relatively intelligent debate because each side's so emotional and so focused on trashing the other side. It's not a good situation right now, as far as I'm concerned.
So you're saying since the late 80s,
Well,
90s.
let me give you a short overview. What I see is what happened. If I could do that.
Yes, please.
Um, everybody likes to talk about the 1970s as this heyday of bipartisanship. Oh, wasn't that wonderful? Well, it was really when the parties were beginning their transition, and um, the Republican Party was in trouble. They had been dominant from 1900 to 1932. 30, and then from 32 on until somewhere in the 60s, they were always in the minority. They couldn't get control of Congress, and they realized they had to do something. And what's fascinating is to watch the Republicans is they believe that they believe the country was conservative, and if they could just articulate their message properly, they would become the majority party. So they ran Barry Goldwater. Well, so that didn't work. He got slaughtered. But they realized we need to do something else. We just can't announce principles of limited government, low taxes, low regulation. So systematically, over 60 years, they embraced the George Wallace approach about race relations and said, we're going to resist civil rights enforcement. Then they embraced the religious right. And boy, that took a long time to come to fruition. They gradually began to take in the religious right, and I think ultimately what's happened is the religious right has largely taken over the party. And then they took in the gun control, the gun nuts. I'm sorry to call them that. I know they think they're the true patriots, but they embraced people who were against any control over guns. They began to embrace people like the NRA who said that, the fundamental right in America is the right to own a gun. And then in the 90s, people like Pat Buchanan began to signal that, we don't like immigrants. They're threatening America. They're threatening the culture. And they embraced them. And in the course of that, the combination of embracing people who are opposed to civil rights, embracing the religious right, which are, I'm sorry to say this so bluntly, but I think they're essentially anti-intellectual because they believe that religion and the Bible should really dictate our policy. And then embracing the gun people and then the anti-immigrant people, they really became very rejecting of experts in science, which we really saw when the COVID thing came along. I think everybody was startled at the hostility to rules that might prevent the spread of COVID. And then what that has is brought, they now have totally taken over there are about 19 states that used to be Democratic, which are now heavily Republican. And they've lost about 11 states in the Northeast and the West Coast. And they are really hunkered down with that base. And I think it showed what really surprised a lot of people was when Trump got elected, he sort of brought that constituency out. And what really surprised a lot of people is that he could win the presidency by only catering to those 19 states and being their representative. And he really sort of scoffed at the states that he lost. And then I think that has brought us to a point where we're really sort of really seriously polarized. And the Democrats have had their problems. They've got their extremists too. I don't want to make it sound like they're innocent.
I was going to ask, is it because initially you started with, and this is the information that I'm seeing. I'm withholding my conclusions. That's why I'm interviewing people. But since the 90s, it looks like you said late 80s, 90s, electoral bases of both parties have become more unified, so more hardcore, right? Like the story I heard was you used to have a Republican Party where you'd have some almost liberal Republicans. Used to have a Democratic Party where you'd have some damn near Republican Democrats. And that's gone. Yeah. It's all hardcore Republican, all hardcore Democrat. And besides being totally unified, no room for divergence of thinking within the party, each party also thinks the opposite party is more of an enemy than anything we've seen before in recent history. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, the Pew Charitable Trust has done some polls, and they asked people about how they perceive the other party, and the percentage that see the other party as a threat to America is steadily rising.
Thank you.
It's really not good. I think if anything illustrates it right now is the struggle over the lifting the debt limit, and that, I mean, you really got Kevin McCarthy, who's in the grip of about 25 people, and they're willing to walk us right up to destroying the economy because they hate the Democrats so bad. And I don't know where we're going with that, but anyway, I think it's indicative of just how polarized everybody is. You know, they're on the other team. We know what it reminds me of. I used to go to basketball games at SU and watch, and you know, the other team was perceived the enemy, and it would be a player from Syracuse could be an evil force on the floor, but he was our evil force, and so he's okay. And that's where we are with the parties, you know, where they now think the other my team might be thugs. I mean, really, there's some guys in the Republican think are nuts, but and the Democrats have theirs too. But.
So it's fair to say, yes, the Republicans have done these things that you've mentioned, but they're not the only ones that are being polarized. When we're looking at polarization and the rise of polarization since at least the 90s, we're looking at both the Democrats and the Republicans have kind of coalesced around a solid ideology and also said, screw you guys more. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, just real quick on the Democrats. I mean, you've got Democrats that constantly talk about equality and equal outcomes, and that horrifies a lot of people in America because they believe that, you know, you work and you earn and you achieve, and if there's some inequality, that's the consequence of having a merit-driven system. So that has really unnerved a lot of conservatives. And then you've got people who talk about immigrants with great compassion, et cetera, and they sort of make it sound like they want to let everybody in. That scares a lot of people. You know,
the Mexican horde. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and Fox News capitalizes on that by showing us endless pictures of people running across open space and scaring everybody. I watch Fox News every once in a while when I'm on the elliptical, and I think I come away thinking I should be scared to live in America because it's all coming down. And the Democrats have not been very good about saying we need to have some limits about who can get in, and it sort of makes everybody a little nervous. You know, and then I think the Democrats have been quick to charge everybody with racism if they say they don't want to do certain things. And in my discipline, I surely have heard of the racial resentment scale.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, first time I read the scale, and I thought to myself, you know, saying that somebody has to work harder in America to achieve is not a racist comment, but it is now. You've got a whole bunch of liberal academics who treat that as if it is, it's racism if you are high on that scale. You know, I mean, both sides have sort of hunkered down in positions that make it hard for a lot of people to see the other side as really decent.
That's what I wanted to get to, is that there's so many polls that show, okay, you know, and I got to play it fair so I can have conservatives on here and they'll talk to me. Liberals come on here and they'll talk to me. But I am a liberal. As I always say, I'm a liberal with two eyes that work. But I am a liberal. And however, say what you will about the Republican Party, but all these surveys, when they're looking at, would you date somebody who doesn't share your politics? Would you live near somebody who doesn't share your politics? Do you hate people on the other side? It's almost identical for Democrats and registered Republicans. Okay, so you're not opposed to that at least the sentimentality. Maybe we can talk about a difference of what games the Republican Party is playing versus the Democratic Party, but sentimentality, they're kind of almost equal with, you know, screw the other guy. This is the poll that's terrifying. I read this to everybody and it terrifies everybody. I mean, people's faces go sober and blank when I read this. 74% of Biden voters, 78% of Trump voters all voters from the other side are a, quote, clear and present danger to the USA. Yes, we shorten that just to danger. But the survey, and this is from the University of Virginia, Sabato Cristobal Center for Politics, very reputable. That phrase, clear and present danger, is typically reserved for a Russian nuclear strike or an ISIS attack, or an attack.
People who are treason.
Yeah, or treason. So now we have Americans, about 4/5 of all voters on both parties, saying, I view the other side as scary as a Russian nuclear strike or a second 9/11.
Yeah.
Not good, right? That's kind of not
good.
You
know, my sense is walking around in society that you can tell how polarized we are is if you try to have a thoughtful conversation with somebody. Let's say immigration.
Sure.
You know, you've got the conservatives are terrified of them. You've got the liberals who are compassionate. And you try to raise the question, we need more immigrants in the United States. Birth rates down. You know, you need workers.
Did you hear? Are you hearing? These are called facts, people.
You know,
facts.
You know that yes, there are. We need to. What I always found fascinating is when people talk about we're being overrun by immigrants. I say, you know that we are a part of an international treaty. It says we must entertain a request for asylum. It is U.S. law. So if everybody's so terrified of this, why don't they change the law? And they are so polarized they can't. But anyway, if you talk to people that, you know, liberal goes into all the compassion about these people fleeing terrible countries, and the conservative goes, they're overrunning the country. You know, my God, they're going to change the culture. And I say, you know, Italians came the same way. You know, the Irish.
Oh my God. You're the first person to acknowledge. I've known that for a decade. You're the first academic I have seen ever mention that the story between Latinos and Italians in the early 1900s are very similar.
It's very, Thank you. I mean,
thank you.
And everybody writes that the Hispanics that come in the United States are hardworking. But you got Trump out there talking about M13. You know,
and those are not good dudes. True.
It's just we're a mess. I think it's a really terrible situation where anyway, I was going to say, when I try to have a thoughtful conversation with people, what I get is sound bites. I get people spitting sound bites at me, and I just stop talking to people because they can't come at it with, well, let's see, what's the other side's argument, and I ought to think about that, and here's mine, and let's think about how we could solve this. It's more like, those people are trying to destroy this country. One
of the things that grabbed me and encouraged me to do the interview series on national divorce, political division, was there was a Time magazine article, and it was saying in 2012, only 30% would not date somebody who is outside their political party, and in 2020 it was 50%. So in just a couple of years, it had gone from 30 to half the country. I won't date you if you don't share my politics. And that's basically never been seen before in American history. That's what they're saying. Here's the question for you. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm 46. You're older than me. You have been around. I'm not trying to be mean. This is for a legitimate question. Okay. This is going somewhere. I'm not wow, this guy's bashing his guests. No, this is going somewhere. I didn't live through the 1960s. I'm a big history buff, but I only have documentaries, movies, interviews with people who did to go off of. I wasn't there. So I only have secondhand information, which I've studied a lot, but it's secondhand. It's not firsthand. And, you know, always go for firsthand. How bad is it now compared to the 1960s? Worse? Not worse? The same? Different?
Well, here's a fundamental difference between the 60s and now.
Please.
The 1960s there were two incredibly glaring screw-ups by elites. One of them was Vietnam. I mean, it's hard to go back and remember how many people were being killed over there. And elites would not budge. They would not acknowledge this is a terrible mistake. We're killing young men because Lyndon Johnson is terrified he'll be accused he's soft on communism. And then it became no one could stop. They just couldn't stop. So it was a challenge to authorities. And then along came civil rights. Civil rights was such a fundamental and moral wrong, the way the South was treating blacks. It was just so blatant that you couldn't help but oppose it, and turn your vengeance on Southern whites because of how bad it was. If anybody, I was one of those ones that grew up in the 60s, and I will tell you, there was nothing like watching on TV the anger of Southern whites. You were stunned by their fury that they had to go to school with a black person.
Right, towards integration. Yeah.
That they might be able to live in their neighborhood, that they might be able to hold a job next to, you watched it and thought, what the hell is going on? So, but anyway, those were fundamental challenges to the social practices and to the authorities running Vietnam. Now, let's fast forward. I think I'm I seem to be one of the few people who sort of makes this argument. I think what has happened since the 1960s is there has been this slow, steady grind of knowledge, which has raised questions about the effects of discrimination on blacks. There has been the slow, steady accumulation of knowledge about how women were mistreated, how they were deprived of opportunities, and that has prompted the issue about, well, shouldn't we give them more rights, more chances? Same thing with blacks. There has been the steady erosion of belief in religion. There has been just this grind of knowledge that says that the truths we lived by maybe are not valid, and maybe they need to be reconsidered. In other words, there has been a steady knowledge change, and that what's horrifying conservatives right now is that steady drip of knowledge. That's why they're so angry about university faculty. That's why they're so focused on this. I mean, I live in Florida now. Ron DeSantis is obsessed with attacking faculty because they see faculty. See, I think what conservatives have done is they have now settled on liberal elites and blamed them for everything. And they believe the liberal elites started in the 60s and they've just grown. And what they're denying is the steady dissemination of these ideas that everybody deserves a chance in America, and that some people are not getting that chance. Blacks aren't getting it. I'm surprised there's not more studies about Hispanics getting discriminated against. But I don't know. I don't see those as often.
Thank you. True, they're not.
Well, it's got to be, but you don't. I think you do not.
I think
the academic world is obsessed with black discrimination too.
Well, it's also just quick aside. I was at a Black Lives Matter rally, and he was talking about Latinos, and Latino people will come and support a protest if an African American male is shot, and support Black Lives Matter. If a Latino male is shot, they won't necessarily go out and protest. And in certain cities in California, the rate of unarmed Latin men being executed by the cops is the same as the police, but the Latin people won't protest. The African American people will. If you see Latin people protesting, it's in support of an African American person. There's just some cultural disconnect. Anyways, back to what you were saying.
No, there really is. But anyway, I think there's been the slow spread of this information. These beliefs that were once. I guess what it comes down to is that for a long time in America, the conservatives would enunciate a belief in individualism, and that anybody who has succeeded deserves it. Anybody who is poor deserves it.
Right.
And what's happened is this mammoth accumulation of studies that said, it's not so clear. A lot of people just got a raw break early in life. Chance plays a huge role. Some people get socked with medical bills that destroy their lives. And that knowledge is being challenged. The liberals believe it. The conservatives are challenging it. They don't want to believe it. This Chris Rufo, who's made a big deal about critical race theory, he's an incredible entrepreneur. I'll give him credit for that. But he's a demagogue who's capitalizing on this fear that kids are being taught to hate America, et cetera, et cetera. Can you imagine in the state, and I follow, again, I'm sorry, but I follow the state of Florida more. The state of Florida has now enacted laws that said it is law that people only achieve on the basis of merit.
Yeah, I mean,
they're
I'm not going to get into Ron DeSantis in Florida. That's a whole other show.
He's a fascinating character.
He's very popular there. I will leave it at that. I didn't say I agree. I didn't say I disagree. I just say he's
no. I don't think. I think Ron DeSantis is indicative of where the Republican Party is right now.
You talked about how it's difficult to have a conversation now, and that is a sign of the level of that's a personal sign in your lived experience of the data that we saw, that you and are familiar with, that I'm familiar with. Things are polarized. You said, hey, easy way to verify the data, just go out and try to have the conversation. Could you have that conversation in the 1960s? And could you not now? Or could you still talk to people in the 1960s? I'm trying to understand how much more polarized or less polarized we are in some sort of metric manner.
I think what's interesting are two things. There were here's what's interesting about it is that in the 1960s, when I would have a conversation with somebody, it was about what we tend to think of as conservative principles. Limited government, too many regulations. Is it a good idea to have taxes too high on certain people because they've achieved, et cetera, et cetera. I think, and I'm sorry I should have mentioned this earlier, I think what happened is conservatism, and I'm stealing from other people, of course, but I think conservatism was once a set of principles, articulated principles. And what happened was they needed these voters that I've talked about before. And so conservatism became what those voters wanted. And it became a social identity. It became less principle, and it became a person who was opposed to civil rights enforcement. That became conservatism. A person who was devoutly religious, that became conservatism. A gun owner became conservatism. A person who doesn't like immigrants became conservatism. So it was all those principles that I used to have arguments with people in the 60s. They're now sort of like cliches in the conservatives, limited government. If you read the Heritage Foundation or some of those freedom works, they babble away about the principles. But what conservatism has really become is a social identity.
Right.
I was going to say, the white people in America.
You're saying we've shifted from a policy discussion
to a social identity.
To social identity.
Well, that's why I think it's become so hard, because you're no longer having a dispute about principles. You're having a dispute about them. They own a gun, and they're selfish for resisting gun control, and you're a nut because you're trying to take away their right to own a gun. You're charging, if you're charging a conservative with being racist, and boy, that lights people up. When you get called a racist because you say, I give you an example. You can run into somebody who's really conservative and you'll talk about gun violence or blacks being killed by cops, and they'll go, 90% of blacks are killed by other blacks. And
sound bites, like you said.
Yeah, but it's become an identity. They're a group of people who think they embody what America is, hardworking. one of the most common phrases that a politician uses now is hardworking. You know, there's something implied in that the others are not hardworking.
Fair enough.
So, you know, it's become an identity. I'm the right kind of person. I work hard. Um, I don't discriminate. So why are you calling me a racist? You know, I believe in God and the Bible, and so why are you calling me a nut for being anti-abortion? Um, you know, I own a gun and I'm safe. Why are you penalizing people who are safe, who or operate safely? You know,
When did this start? I know you've covered it a little bit, but just for people, just to
it's very gradual how it's occurred. Very gradual.
very gradual from the 80s, 90s till now.
It started in the 70s.
Started in the 70s. Okay.
70s was a time where everybody was trying to, the parties were trying to sort things out. You know, the Democrats were trying to decide where they're going to dump the Southern constituency. Lyndon Johnson dumped him in 1964 when he
let me ask you another question. Some people have said, well, this is some of what I'm hearing about the difference between now and the 1960s. 1960s was much more violent than now. We're not experiencing the level of violence then. There was more bombings and shootings. It's good. But so that means it's better now than then. But one thing I've heard from a few people is, as bad as it was in the 1960s, everybody believed in the Constitution. If somebody was elected president, everybody accepted that person was elected president. They would actually listen to the Supreme Court. Now we have the lowest faith in the Supreme Court, Congress, the presidency, Congress in general, and almost every federal institution, including the FBI, in 40 years. Additionally, we have one party will say, I doubt that your person was elected for the next 4 years. And then the next election, the other party will go, I'm going to go ahead and doubt that your person was elected for the next 4 years. And you didn't have that in the 1960s. There seemed to be a common belief in institutions. You know, maybe I have a difference of opinion with you, but I'm not about to say, let's ignore the Supreme Court. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
I think what's happened, you know, the Supreme Court, you know, if you're a conservative, you spent 40 years, 50 years in the Federalist Society, spent buckets and buckets of money recruiting people, having a plan to put them on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court delivered what they wanted. I think, you know, Sam Alito, he may be a Supreme Court justice. I think he's he's devoted to religion. I read the Dobbs decision 3 times. Was sort of stunned at how much it was based on religion, how blatant it was that, you know, we're in charge, we're going to change the rules. I mean, sure. You're going to get disrespect for the Supreme Court if you do that. He took the Roe versus Wade was a very carefully calibrated decision to balance the rights of women and the rights of the unborn. And Sam Alito just said, the hell with women.
Fair, but there is for a fact the lowest level of faith. And before the Supreme Court was turned conservative, like it was, I think, with Amy Coney Barrett being the last chip in the block, you still, years before that, you still had the lowest faith in the court, Congress, the presidency, the House, the Senate, the FBI in 40 years, almost half a century. And my understanding is that wasn't there in the 1960s. Additionally,
was not at all.
Okay, we didn't have
people. There has been, you know, I don't know. Everybody's tried to figure out. Let me be real clear. I don't know why trust has declined so much, but there have been a lot of people tried to figure it out because it was high in the 60s.
Yeah.
And some people blame it on Vietnam. Some people, I don't think that's accurate. Vietnam is ancient history to most of the electorate now. You know,
yeah, true. If I could show you these maps though on the screen, I don't know if you can see these. I know they're it's not as big as possible. So the map on the left is from the 2000 presidential election, and it's looking at votes by county. The map in the center is from the 2020 presidential election, And the map on the right is from the 1968 presidential elections. So on the far left, 2000, in the center, 2020, on the far right, 1968. And what you can notice is that this was what was brought to me was, if you look at the map on 2000 on the far left, you'll notice a lot of light pink and light blue. If we forward to the map in the middle from the 2020 election, almost all the light pink and light blue has been wiped out, and you have only hard red and hard blue, which means people got even more polarized. They used to, barely win a Republican, maybe next elections it's barely Democrat, to now it's the Republicans won hardcore, not even a chance for Democrats in this area. And that's over a 20-year period. The maps in between match up. Now let's compare that to 1968. I wasn't there, but from the research that I've done, they were saying 1968 was a pivotal year. It was a big year, a vote on Vietnam, a vote on the conscience of America. This was the politics is definitely part of the presidential election vote. I wasn't there. That's just what I'm hearing from historians. And if we look at 1968, the pivotal year of the consequential polarized 60s, I see a lot of light pink and light blue.
I think our country was in transition then. That's what I'll agree. 1968 was crucial, but not because of Vietnam and those things. It's because of George Wallace. George Wallace led. He was the indicator of where there were votes to be acquired that Republicans had never thought they could win. They thought, I don't know if you've ever read the Kevin Phillips book, The Emerging Republican Majority. Great book.
I've seen that. I
Great
haven't
book.
read it, but I've heard of it. Yes.
Because Kevin Phillips laid out, here's where you're going to go if you're going to capitalize on what George Wallace showed us. And the 1968 one was, the parties had been locked down. The Democratic coalition was Northern, Southern, strange coalition, very strange coalition. The Republican Party was largely based in the Northeast and somewhere in California. California was Republican.
I've heard.
And what ensued was gradually people studied where George Wallace had won and moved steadily to entice that constituency to come into the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party could not keep them because they would have to give up on civil rights. They would have to just capitulate and back off civil rights.
Right.
And they had thrown down the gauntlet and said, no, we're going to enforce that. So I think 1968 was pivotal, but it was the beginning of the change. And the only reason the 70s were confusing is because Jimmy Carter ran. And Jimmy Carter sort of resurrected the Democratic coalition for a bit.
Oh, from the South. I get what you're saying.
Everybody was sort of confused about.
Right. The trend's going one way and Carter's a hold on from the old trend.
Ronald Reagan figured out very clearly that if he, don't ever forget that Ronald Reagan opened his 1980 campaign in the county in Mississippi where 3 civil rights workers had been murdered. Philadelphia County, I think it was. I can't remember, but he opened it in 1980 and said, "I stand for civil or state rights." And it was a crusade. 1980.
Reagan's first place running for presidency was the county where the 3 civil rights workers got shot and killed, and he started with "I believe in states' rights." Wow. Oh my God, that's called dog whistling today.
Oh yeah.
That's called white supremacist dog whistling today.
He said
I
it
did
all.
not know he did that.
Yeah. I mean,
wow, pretty shocked. Wow.
So it really was.
Damn.
There's.
I remember
Ronald Reagan had a marvelous personality, and I think he got away with a lot of things because he was seen as such a nice guy. Donald Trump may have done the same things, but his personalities didn't exactly give him a break.
Yeah. I bet that sounds true. I remember reading about Reagan and I was shocked. I never heard this until maybe like 5 years ago, and I'm in California. Um,
Yeah.
he was the first. So the Kent State massacre, where they shot a student over protesting in the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
um, that happened because when Reagan was running for governor, he was basically saying we should be tougher and people should be willing to, like, rough up these protesters or shoot them. And he was a governor. And then like a week or two later, another governor in another state saw that. And then Kent State happened. So Kent State happened because Reagan put the idea out there that we need to get tough with these civil
It could
rights.
be. I lived in Ohio then. The governor of Ohio was a tough son of a bitch. He was one of the guys that said, like George Wallace, if they get in front of me, I'll run them over.
True. But historians said that the governors were not willing to take that stance until they saw Ronald Reagan basically publicly say it.
Maybe so. I don't know where he got it.
He was the one that broke the dam, so to speak, and goes, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's get out there. And then in short order after that, well, things. So, yeah.
I think that, what happened is there's been a long process of conservatives pushing back against liberals. And it's just taken a long time to get so organized and so focused that now we've ended up where we are, where they're really angry about liberals. Liberals are very angry about conservatives. And that's why you're getting those numbers you showed before.
I wanted to ask you about The Big Sort. Have you heard of The Big Sort?
Oh, yeah, I've read it. Great book. Yeah.
Is it true?
I don't think there's any doubt it's true. Let me go back to this thing I mentioned about the knowledge, this issue about whether or not you accept that life is more complicated than an individualist interpretation. And if you believe in knowledge, if you're in the profession of knowledge, or if you're in a world where knowledge matters, what happens is you gravitate toward urban areas. So it becomes reinforcing. You live in small towns and rural areas, and you don't move in that world where there's people engaging in that kind of talk. Or if you do live in a small town and you engage in that kind of talk, you learn pretty quickly. Shut up.
So, I saw that in Fresno. I was told to shut up when I was talking facts about the Iraq War. Absolutely back up what you're saying.
So you get a gradual sorting out. People who are comfortable with knowledge, comfortable with new ideas, move to urban areas. People who say the world's set. It's set. There's nothing to redo. We've always been this way, and we will be this way. And they don't want to do with those urban people. And then you get the fact that minorities are predominant in urban areas. I mean, there's a book I can't remember right now I read years ago about the incredible movement of blacks out of the South, out of rural areas into urban areas. It's made a huge difference because now whites and conservatives identify urban areas as them. As minorities. So
I don't know if I want to ask this question.
Or you can ask anything you want, as long as it's not personal.
No, because I don't want to get too sidetracked from the issues I want to ask. Actually, we'll come back to it. Well, I'll just say there was a theory, and we're going to be doing an interview soon with this expert. There was a theory that the Bosnian Civil War was really about urban-rural divides. And I read a paper, and I'm talking to one of the experts of the Bosnia conflict, and he said that aspect of the division really didn't get enough attention. People were focusing on ethnic groups, but what he said in his paper was cities were diverse, minorities, Muslims, different ideas. Countryside was all ethnic Bosnian or Croat or whatever the bad guys were at that time. And so you had this rural hinterland where everybody's one ethnicity, one religion, kind of one identity. And the cities are where all the Muslims go, all the minorities, all the people who aren't necessarily Orthodox Christian Serbian go. And so there was this idea that, the cities really aren't us, that we're the Volk, the people, the rural people, and that's the city.
Real Americans.
Yes, we're real Americans. Those aren't real Americans. Maybe there are some Bosnians and Serbs that live in those cities, but they're really kind of gotten corrupted hanging out with too many Muslims, if you know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so he said that attitude was there, and it helped exacerbate the tensions and cause the conflict where people started shooting at each other. But it came from this original idea of cities are diverse. They're full of a lot of foreign ideas and foreign people. We aren't, so they're bad and wrong.
It is no accident that every time Trump challenged election results, he challenged urban counties. He was applying that urban counties are corrupt because Democrats are in them and they're corrupt. And sometimes people are subtle about it, sometimes they're not. I read an essay the other day by Molly Hemingway, who writes for the Federalist, and she argued that urban voting is corrupt because they go around and get people who don't know anything and collect their ballots and use drop boxes. And we've got to stop that because those people, they really don't know what they're doing. Of course, presuming that rural people do know what they're doing.
We can't trust the elections on where we're going to be partitioned because the UN is involved and they're going into the cities and they're putting these ideas in the Muslims' heads, and maybe they're kind of not doing the elections fairly. So we really can only trust people who aren't from the outside and aren't Muslims, which is exclusively our ethnic religious group.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe there's something there. That's kind of.
Oh, it's really. I mean, the rural-urban divide is getting bigger and bigger.
I was hoping you were going to tell me there isn't something there because that's truly terrifying. Let me show you this map. This is based upon the Big Sort. This comes from the New York Times. Came out in 2016, 7 years ago. The Big Sort was also backed up by the NPR in 2022, 2017, and 2008. Over the last 20 years, they've been saying this is still true. This is the map I show everybody. If you look at the map in the top left corner, it's 1992 presidential elections. Red means don't even run here. If you're a Democrat, you have no chance. Republicans win by 20 percentage points over Democrats. Blue means don't even run here if you're a Republican. Democrats win by 20 percentage points. Gray means competitive elections, though. Sometimes we vote for Obama. Sometimes we vote for McCain. We're kind of open to what the idea is, who seems to be the better person for the time. And you can see from 1992 to 2000, then to 2012, and finally ending up at 2016, almost all the gray has been completely wiped out from America, and it's only hardcore red and hardcore blue. This pattern goes back to the 1990s. And
let me take it back further. I spent a lot of time collecting data on House districts going back to 1900, and I was able to get the density, that is number of people per square mile. And in the early, for most of the half of the 20th century, the correlation between Republican vote and density was positive.
Nice.
Since then, it has steadily grown more negative.
Nice.
And we now have a Republican Party that wins its greatest percentage in the areas where the density is lowest, incomes are lowest, education is lowest.
Right.
So what is dramatic is that the Republican Party, when I was a kid, the Republican Party people were always the smarter people, the achievers, the well-to-do people, the ones with more education, and the Democrats were the other side, And now the Republican Party, it still has the business and the affluent, still has that, but they now have increasingly are really, their base is this group of people that are falling behind in America, and they're angry about it, and they're alienated from the cities, and they think the cities are ripping them off, and the cities are corrupt. I mean, it's a real serious divide.
So the Big Sort goes to the 1990s or even earlier. What you're saying? Thank you for saying that. Hey, folks, this is it. This is why I do the interviews, because I'm learning too. I go off the data and then we talk to people and they go, and this is This is real science, what you're saying. You have a conclusion, and then somebody pokes holes in it, and you have to go, well, now I have to go back and do the research again, instead of going, I don't like your facts. Maybe you're a bad person, and maybe you got your facts from whitesupremacy.com, so I'll just ignore them. I'm going to have to go and do some more research. I admit I had the professor saying some stuff. I'm going to have to go look again. This is what we should all be doing. My question for you, Professor, is let's say it goes back to the 1970s. Let's say it goes to the 1990s. Why is everybody saying, oh, it's because of social media? Social media didn't become a problem linked to politics till around 2010, 2015. Oh, it's become because of extreme elite politicians. We didn't really see that till the rise of Trump 2018, 2020. No. It's gerrymandering. Gerrymandering didn't become a problem until the 2000 election. I have read 30 different articles from all sorts of professors and experts, and they will go, it's gerrymandering, it's elite politicians, it's social media, and not one of them will bring up the big sword, which predates all of those options by decades. How come
there's a book Carlos Lopez wrote, writes for the Washington Post, who wrote a book, What Were We Thinking? And in there, in his introduction, he makes a very insightful comment about studies. He says, what happens is that somebody who has expertise tends to focus on it. They tend to focus on social media. And so they conclude when they do their studies that social media is driving everything. Another person has an expertise in race relations, and they find, lo and behold, that race relations are. And then another person studies immigration.
Right.
So what you're getting is that people write about their specialty. I think they all bundle together. They just really, the sort occurs. Republicans, all these things occur. Immigration occurs. People, the gun people line up with one side and oppose the other side. And then it all comes together, and then they do gerrymander. The Republicans get the majority. They gerrymander. They then create districts where there is less competition for both Democrats and Republicans. Then the only thing the politician has to worry about is their primary. So they become more extreme. And it's a culmination of a long process. And does social media matter? Oh, I think it matters a great deal. I mean, I joke about it, but it's a very serious matter. If you were to watch Rachel Maddow for a while, you'd think the conservatives are the most evil people in the world. If you watch Fox News for a while, you'd realize that liberals are trying to destroy America. And you'd wonder, how are we going to survive them? It all comes together. It's not one thing. And that's what makes it very complicated.
Is it fair? We were talking to another professor, and he said, it's a circle. They feed on themselves. Hey, I'm polarized. I naturally don't like you, so now I'm cool with more rigged gerrymandering. Hey, I'm polarized. I don't like you, so now I'm going to go to an even more extreme social media channel. So
when you go back to the immigration thing, I was watching Fox the other day on the elliptical, and here it is. These pictures of immigrants coming. Oh my God, they're overwhelming. It reminded me of 2018 when they talked about the caravans coming to overwhelm America. Yeah. And not once in a half-hour segment, scaring the hell out of us about immigration, did they say to anybody, by law, we're required to accept a request for asylum. And I thought, then you've got the liberals on the other channel talking about these poor people who are living in terrible countries, And, never once did anybody say the reason why all these people are at the border is because by law, we must accept their request. So I thought the debate is a joke. It's a joke. It's just a mess.
I salute you. I salute you. Yeah, absolutely.
I had to look it up 5 times because I thought, this is so obvious what's going on.
Yeah, but let's also, just real quick again, I don't want to get sidetracked, but as a Latino, I always find it interesting when they talk about immigration and they won't bring up 2 facts. One, America illegally invaded Mexico, destabilized the country, and brought all those Southwest states in. And those are the states that Americans are constantly complaining about the Mexican horde coming into. So You're going, oh, they're coming into Texas and Arizona, New Mexico, and California. Can you guys at least mention that you invaded another country illegally and aggressively and based upon the theory of manifest destiny, which is a form of white supremacy? And can we also admit that the reason that we have this caravan is that every single Latin country except for Costa Rica has been invaded and destabilized from America since Teddy Roosevelt? They will never bring up those two facts when they're talking about people coming over the board. And it's like
bring that up in Florida.
They did in the past to cause these problems.
We won't let you talk about that in Florida.
No, don't screw it. Facts hurt. I don't like your facts.
Yeah.
So let me ask you though a question going back to what the point of this interview is. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm sorry. But okay, it's a virtuous circle or an evil circle feeding on itself. And yes, I'm a social media expert, so I conclude it's social media. I conclude it's gerrymandering. I conclude it's extreme politicians. It's my background. But the big sort has been national news for 15 to 20 years. All of them forgot it. And for every person who's talking about the social media did it, no, gerrymandering did it, no, extreme politicians did it, there's almost no one bringing up the big sort. Like there is a dearth of people mentioning the big sort at all. So it's either they're unaware of it or we don't have any experts on the big sort. How come I can see so many people talking about social media, extreme politicians, gerrymandering, and I almost can't find anybody at all today talking about the big sort is the cause? Why is that?
I will say you might look up William Fry, who works for Brookings.
Okay.
He's done some great work on that. And Brookings has done some work on it. But you're right. I'm one of those people who thinks the academic profession is a little too wrapped up in race. That race is everything in America, and it's much more complicated than that. Race is just one aspect of this bigger battle over who's a real American, what's the right way to live. When Trump gets up and talks constantly about we're going to lose our country, we're going to take back our country, about they're threatening the American way of life, it's about all these things come together about identity.
Right.
That's what he's really talking about.
Right.
It's identity, and that's why he was able to get away with saying that he was really for the white working class, and he did nothing for them, but he gave them validation. He gave them validation.
He did. They thought their jobs were being taken away from Mexicans, and he said Mexico sends all garbage and trash and rapists over here. And then he had a taco salad the next day. I think, yeah, absolutely.
What I think, and it's a culmination of everything we've talked about, he picked up on this, how this all comes together as identity. Identity. I'm the right American.
He's a marketing genius.
I have a gun and I'm law-abiding. I didn't break the law by coming into the country illegally. I believe in God and religion and and I don't discriminate. I'm a good American.
I'd like to present a theory to you.
Go ahead.
If things keep going well, I find it weird when I see the media, when I see, hey, we're talking about the big sort, it's national news, it's talked about Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NPR, Time Magazine, everybody's been documenting it. And then when we get to, oh my God, Marjorie Taylor Greene started talking about national abortion, we can't live together, complete memory failure. I don't know. No, it's gerrymandering, social media. It's anything but the big sort. Let's not even mention that. Let's not have any experts, but let's have everybody talk 300% more about these other things. My theory, I can't prove it, is that if it's social media, you can pass a law to regulate the social media companies. If it's gerrymandering, you could pass a law or fix it in Congress to fix gerrymandering. If it's extreme politicians, you could change some voting behavior, some voting laws and stuff, and you could fix that. If it's the American people themselves have been doing this for 30 years, there is no law you can pass to quickly fix this. There is no elite that you can spank publicly to change. We're talking a massive cultural change that would probably take 30 years to undo, since it took 30 years to make happen. Wild theory or perhaps
No. I think it really is I read book after book after book about elites in Washington, and I think to myself, they miss the point. It's not, they miss the point entirely. It's the public out there. And the thing that everybody loves to write about Donald Trump, it's not Donald Trump, it's his base. And it's the base that opposes him. And there's just too many books about Washington game playing. And so they're fun to read, but they don't get that it's out there in the American public. And there are people who are hunkered down with their beliefs and their paranoia, their sense of injustice. And Donald Trump would be nothing. He'd be a wacko at the end of the bar who had too many beers if it wasn't for his base. And that's what we need is more studies about what's happened to create these divergent bases that are so far apart from each other. So your theory is not wild at all. That's what we need more about what's going on with that. And there are a lot of people doing studies about how the public is polarized, but
true.
There's some really good studies about that, but
true.
We still need to have more about that and less about trying to blame one particular thing.
There are good studies, and we're reaching out to those people, and they've been doing studies, over the last 20 years, and a lot of diligent people have been working on it. I just noticed that when Marjorie Taylor Greene talked about national divorce, there was an explosion of commentary after that, and almost all of it completely ignored the big sort and went after these other three things. And I go, well, that's kind of interesting that when the topic becomes real and scary, this option that has been nationally documented in multiple publications is nowhere to be mentioned, but other things are. My experience is if you have an elephant in the room and an apple and a banana, and the news only talks about the apple and the banana, it's not because they don't see the elephant, it's because they don't want to acknowledge it. That's just my theory. Can't prove it.
The other thing is, I don't think, in some ways, this is not terribly dissimilar from 1890s to about 1910.
How so?
Populism came along then because there was this huge movement out of rural areas into urban areas. Manufacturing and industrial life was growing. A lot of people who lived in rural areas felt very left behind, and populism surged. And it's because things got better for a lot of people, but there was a terrible transition. It was really hard on a lot of people. What we're going through now is a lot of rural areas are struggling, and they're not growing. Their incomes are down. They feel neglected. And the thing is, I think the reality is the Republican Party has no answer for that constituency. They have no policies that will help them. So the anger is just going to build, and I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better.
We're winding down. I got one or two more questions for you. I do want to make another point. I'm not going to get sidetracked, but when you're talking about how Trump couldn't have won if there wasn't this base of this racism already there, one of the things I found was when Trump got elected and all my fellow liberals were like, he's making people racist. He's making people racist. And I go, do you remember the Miss America pageants during the presidency of Barack Obama? One was for a girl her parents were from Palestine. I think she was here at age 1. She's an American. Grew up here, listened to Britney Spears, whatever girls do here. But she was technically Palestinian, looked Palestinian. Then there was another girl whose parents were from India. Same thing. She was born here or she came over here at 1 or 2, but she looked Indian. When those people were announced as Miss America, there were many national news articles that came out because there was so much hate on social media about how these people need to get, I won't say it, but what are they doing in our country and why don't they have a cloth around their head? And the backlash was so extreme, it was national media. I remember seeing NBC reporters going, damn, like they were shocked at the amount of pushback. with the Palestinian girl, and then it happened again with the Indian girl. Nobody was even thinking of Trump being president at those times. Trump did not make all those Americans say, I am disgusted that these brown-skinned women who come from foreign cultures are representing America, even though they basically grew up here and they don't really know any other culture but our own. Trump didn't make that happen. That happened twice. It was a national news story twice.
Yeah.
And yet everybody forgot about that when Trump came, and it was he makes things racist. And I go, maybe the American people themselves are racist.
Well,
Trump.
No, there is enormous amount of anger out there, and you can see it every time. Like when elections, people who run elections have told innumerable stories about the volume of hate mail they got because they said the election was legit. These are the results. We checked them twice, and they report the staggering amount of violence, the violent language directed at them. And there's just some. The only thing I would say about social media is I think it has enabled angry people to speak. Every once in a while, I read Twitter and I scroll through and I think, boy, this is just some people just spitting out hostility and
race to the bottom. It really does seem like race to the bottom.
There are people who you would run into earlier in life and realize that they had no vehicle to say that, because if they said it to somebody in person, people would look at them and like, oh, come on, calm down. But on social media, you could be this spear throwing person who really vents at other people and expresses
right, and you get rewarded for it and find other friends. And humans we look for accolades, support from our community, people saying that we're valuable. You start putting trash and negativity out there and people saying, hey, good job. Well, you're feeding our basic needs as humans, and that's only going to encourage more.
The thing about how many likes you get, how many followers.
Oh yeah.
It's an enticement.
We're winding down. One of the last questions. Can we fix this? Before you answer, Marjorie Taylor Greene came out, said, hey, we need a national divorce. We can't live together. We're so divided, so polarized. And some of the responses immediately were, we just need more federalism. There was a Utah governor who said, oh, Marjorie, you're so silly. We don't need national divorce. We need marriage counseling. What does marriage counseling look like for a population of 300 million that is as polarized as us? And who does that?
I don't think there's a solution to this. I think what's going to happen is, and I think let's go back to Roe versus Wade and Dobbs. What Dobbs said was, we are in effect not one nation. That if one state wants to penalize doctors, nurses who provide abortion and criminalize having an abortion, that's okay. And so if you think the big sort was true before, I don't know. I have no idea, but I have read stories that doctors who do OB/GYN are choosing not to pursue, or getting out of medical school, who don't want to go to the southern states because they've already found out they're at risk, if they perform certain services. Florida has said that they're going to change the tenure rules, and there are all sorts of things. But anyway, if you're a faculty member and you're really a high achiever, are you going to move to Florida? I think it's going to get more pronounced, because what the conservatives have decided is states' rights is the way to go, because then we can have about 20, 25 states where our rules dominate, and people who are conservative can move here, and if you don't like it, leave. And the Supreme Court is essentially going to validate that. They're going to say that if your rights are, think about that. For 150 years, I don't know how long it was, Your civil rights were dependent on the year or the state you were born in. You either had to leave the state or you didn't have civil rights.
I
And
remember learning.
we are going to move back to that situation. State legislatures are going to pass laws banning what can be taught, medical practices. They're banning transsexual treatment. They're going to make gays feel in hospital not well received in some states. I'm afraid we're headed toward a long. Ron Brownstein has written some wonderful things about this. That we could be headed toward two nations. A nation within a nation, which is really just depressing. Really
Ron
sad.
Brownstein, where's he at?
Yeah, he writes some really good stuff about how we're headed. We could be headed toward two. Because what we're seeing in the state level is what Republicans really want to do. We're not seeing in Congress because it's so polarized and gridlocked that nothing happens in Congress much anymore.
Thank you.
At the state level, we're really seeing what Republicans want to do, and we're seeing what Democrats want to do. So it's I don't know about marriage counseling. I think we're just going to we're going to be like couples you read about where the marriage died, but they still live in the same house.
The trial separation or the dead marriage. Yeah. Okay, folks. So we're looking forward to a dead marriage or trial separation.
I'm sorry to be so negative.
Yeah. It's up for the public to make their own opinion. We want unfettered opinions here.
I think that what I've watched across the southern states is that they are bound and determined to restrict voting. They're bound and determined to restrict what's taught in schools. They're going to limit abortion. They're going to get their way, and you're either going to like it or you're going to leave.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
I hope that you found that this was not gotcha journalism. We didn't put words in your mouth. We tried to have a fair conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Is there anyone you could recommend who you might think might be willing to be part of an honest conversation on this political division topic?
Not right off the top of my head.
I'll email you.
There's a person I would highly recommend. They wrote a book called The Long Southern Strategy.
Okay.
A woman named Angie Maxwell. She teaches it. She and a guy named Todd Shields wrote a wonderful book about how this all comes together.
I will try to get a hold of her.
Angie Maxwell. And Ron Brownstein, I bet he'd talk to you. I don't know. He's pretty busy. He's on CNN.
We'll reach out to him. Anybody else, if you can think of, I will email you a copy of the video in a few hours. We always keep the conversation going, and we find that if people can go, hey, I did an interview. It wasn't gotcha journalism. They let me speak my piece, and we could have a conversation, disagree, agree. That's great. The last thing I want to ask you, this thing I always ask guests. Well, I don't always ask guests. Sometimes they give the answer before I ask the question. But here's the question. Oh, I want you to picture yourself out of body. You're a third-party person. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third-party person, and you've watched this, and we've talked here for a bit. A week from now, 5 days from now, we've talked about a lot of stuff. And you're thinking to yourself, I saw this interview and it was pretty good. I can't exactly remember everything they said, but the professor said this one thing, and I can't get it out of my head. What is that one thought you'd like random people to not be able to forget 5 days from now?
The only thing I'd say is I think it's pretty dangerous, the direction we're headed in. I don't think it's an over-exaggeration to say it is it's dangerous. Two very different visions of what is a good society.
Well, that was sobering. Okay. Normally these are more uplifting, but I appreciate the honesty. We're here for being honest. We're here for the real information. Like I always tell people, I'm almost going to start selling shirts. Facts hurt. Yeah. They're still facts. You can't just ignore them. So we'll leave it there. Thank you, Professor. I will
Okay.
email you soon. Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate this. And I will email you in a couple hours with a copy of the video.
Okay. Thank you.